She enters the courtroom with a composure that feels completely out of place. Christa Pike, only 18, walks as if she's stepping onto familiar ground, not into a room where she will face the consequences of a crime so disturbing it stunned even veteran investigators. She sits down, glances toward the judge, and then it appears. That smirk. It's subtle, but sharp, a quick lift at the corner of her mouth. The kind of expression you'd expect from a teenager caught skipping class, not from someone accused of a killing marked by cruelty, jealousy, and cold calculation. That smirk tells a story long before the trial even begins. It shows a confidence, a defiance, and a darkness that refuses to hide.
Not only did prosecutors have a cheerful confession, police found a keepsake from the killing.
To understand this unsettling smile, we have to step back into Christa's past. A life marked by instability, neglect, and a growing need for control. Her journey from troubled teenager to convicted killer didn't happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, shaped by fear, obsession, and the desperate desire to hold on to the one thing she believed she could never lose. This is where her story begins, right before the world learned her name. Before Christa Pike ever walked into a courtroom with that chilling smirk, she lived a childhood shaped by instability and emotional neglect. Her early years were marked by chaos, constant moves, unreliable caregivers, and a mother who struggled with her own battles. Christa never had the foundation most children rely on. Instead, she grew up learning that love was conditional, attention was inconsistent, and safety was never guaranteed. By the time she reached her teenage years, Christa was already carrying scars, some visible, most hidden. School offered little structure, and home offered even less. She drifted toward anyone who made her feel seen, even briefly. That hunger for validation became the doorway to darker influences. Christa's emotional instability grew more pronounced. She acted out, pushed boundaries, and slipped deeper into behavior that screamed for help no one provided. Each step pulled her further away from normalcy, closer toward an obsession with control, something she felt life had repeatedly taken from her. This foundation of neglect and unresolved trauma would become the root of everything that followed. And as Christa entered adolescence, those roots took an even darker turn. As Christa grew older, the instability of her childhood began shaping her into someone desperate for attachment, any attachment. So when she joined the Job Corps program in Knoxville, Tennessee, she saw it as a fresh start. But instead of finding stability, she found something far more dangerous. An obsession that would eventually consume her. Within weeks, Christa became deeply attached to Tatterall Shipp, a fellow student. To Christa, Tatterall wasn't just a boyfriend. He became an anchor, a source of validation, and the only person she felt truly understood her. Their relationship wasn't built on trust or genuine affection. It was built on intensity, insecurity, and a need for control. Wakas. It sets the stage for where everything spiraled. But there was one thing Christa couldn't stand: anyone who threatened her connection to Tatterall. And in her eyes, that threat took the shape of Colleen Slemmer, a 19-year-old student who had no idea she was walking into Christa's paranoia. What began as a simple insecurity evolved into a consuming obsession. Christa became convinced, without evidence, that Colleen was trying to steal Tatterall away. It wasn't true, but logic didn't matter. Christa didn't see reality. She saw competition, and competition to her was unforgivable. Christa's jealousy didn't burn quietly. It spread fast, twisting into something darker with every passing day. What began as suspicion toward Colleen Slemmer soon transformed into a fixation. Christa was convinced that Colleen posed a threat to her relationship with Tatterall Shipp, and once that idea rooted itself in Christa's mind, it refused to let go. By now, Christa wasn't just irritated or insecure. She was angry, obsessed, and in her world, threats didn't get ignored, they got eliminated. She started watching Colleen more closely, twisting everyday interactions into imagined betrayals, small glances, casual conversations, even simple greetings. Christa interpreted them as proof that Colleen was trying to take Tatterall from her. Wakas. This builds the tension of what's coming. Christa's anger fed her desire for dominance. She started talking to Tatterall and another student, Shadala Peterson, about Colleen, painting herself as the victim and Colleen as the enemy. And slowly, disturbingly, a plan began to form. Christa told them she wanted to confront Colleen, not talk, confront. She hinted that something needed to be done about her, something permanent, and while Colleen had no idea, the shadows around her were thickening. The plan that would end her life was already taking shape. quietly, deliberately, and with chilling intent. January 12th, 1995, the night that Colleen Slemmer thought would be a simple conversation, but Christa Pike had already decided exactly how it would end. Christa approached Colleen with an unusual friendliness, telling her she just wanted to talk, clear the air, settle whatever tension existed between them. It sounded harmless enough, and Colleen, eager to avoid further conflict, agreed. But the moment she stepped outside the campus grounds with Christa, Tataril Ship, and Shadala Peterson, the path ahead of her was already sealed. Wakas. This visual shift marks the beginning of the danger. They told Colleen they were heading to a spot in the woods nearby, a quiet place where they could talk privately. But what Colleen didn't know was that Christa had no interest in talking. She was leading Colleen into isolation, far from anyone who could hear her scream. As they walked deeper into the wooded trail, Colleen grew uneasy. She sensed the tension, the strange energy, but by then, it was too late. Christa's demeanor shifted from forced friendliness to cold focus. Every step Colleen took carried her further from safety, and closer to the trap Christa had been preparing all along. The deeper they went into the woods, the more Colleen sensed something was wrong. Christa's voice, once pretending to be calm, grew sharper. Her steps became quicker, almost impatient, as if she couldn't wait any longer for what she had been planning. Finally, the group reached an isolated clearing. No lights, no echoes of campus life, just cold air, wet leaves, and the unsettling silence of a place far removed from help. Wakas, this is where everything escalates. Colleen tried to ask what was going on, but Christa didn't give her a chance. In an instant, the confrontation erupted. Christa accused her of flirting with Tataril, shouting, pacing, lashing out with words fueled by paranoia and jealousy. Before Colleen could defend herself, Christa struck her, hard. The first blow wasn't just physical, it was the point of no return. Shadala watched. Tadaril didn't step in, and Christa, seeing no resistance, continued. Colleen cried, pleaded, insisted she had never gone after Tataril. But Christa wasn't listening. Her anger had already turned into something darker, something driven by obsession, ego, and the thrill of holding complete power over someone. This was the moment where fear turned into violence, and violence into horror. What followed in that silent clearing was not a fight. It was a brutal, relentless assault, one driven not by impulse, but by intention. Christa Pike had already made up her mind long before Colleen ever stepped into the woods. The first hit stunned Colleen, but the blows didn't stop. Christa grabbed her by the hair, dragging her deeper into the clearing as Colleen begged for mercy. Her pleas echoed through the darkness, but no one answered. Not Tataril, not Shadala, no one. Wakas. These shots help emphasize the hopelessness of Colleen's situation. Christa's rage grew with every strike. She taunted Colleen, mocking her fear, feeding off the power she finally felt she had. In Christa's mind, this moment wasn't just revenge. It was dominance, control, validation, all the things she never had growing up. Colleen tried to crawl away, but Christa caught her again. She kicked her, beat her, and continued accusing her of trying to take Tataril. The accusations made no sense, because there was never any evidence of it, but logic didn't matter anymore. Christa only saw the world through her own distorted obsession. The brutality escalated quickly. Christa's actions grew more frenzied, more violent, more desperate to make her suffering known. Colleen was injured, terrified, and fighting just to breathe. But Christa wasn't finished. This night in the woods, cold, silent, and almost unreal, was only the beginning of the horror that would later shock Tennessee and the entire country. Every second in that clearing pushed Colleen closer to tragedy, and pushed Christa deeper into the darkness she could. The attack on Colleen Slemmer had already crossed every imaginable line, but Christa Pike wasn't finished. What happened next would forever mark this case as one of the most disturbing crimes in Tennessee's history. Colleen, badly injured and terrified, tried again to crawl away. Her voice was weak, shaking, desperate, but Christa followed her like a shadow, calm now, almost collected. That shift in her demeanor made the moment even more terrifying. Wakas extremely dark. Slow-motion forest visuals add karo. Dead leaves, fog, close-up shots of branches. Woman of crime ke emotional tension ke sath. Christa pulled out a box cutter. The small metallic click in the silence of the woods was more chilling than any scream. Colleen begged her to stop, saying she just wanted to go home. But Christa, driven by delusion and a twisted need to prove her power, ignored every plea. She used the blade. Not quickly, not mercifully. Each cut showed a cruelty that investigators later struggled to explain. Christa carved into Colleen's chest, leaving a mark that would become one of the most shocking details of the case. Tataril stood nearby. Shadola watched. Neither stepped forward to help. The woods were quiet except for Colleen's sobs and Krista's steady, controlled breathing. It was as if Christa had slipped into another version of herself, one that saw pain as proof of dominance. As Colleen's strength faded, she still tried to plead, still tried to understand why this was happening, but Christa wasn't listening anymore. She was too deep into her own rage, too lost in the darkness she had created. The end came slowly, brutally, and without mercy. This moment would haunt everyone who learned about the case, and would solidify Christa Pike as the youngest woman on death row in modern American history. When investigators arrived at the isolated site, even they weren't prepared for what they found. The brutality of the attack was immediately clear, but what shocked them most was the intentional evidence Christa Pike left behind, almost as if she wanted the world to know what she had done. Wakas, woman of crime style, Colleen's injuries told a story of rage and control, but the most infamous detail was the symbol Christa carved into Colleen's chest. It wasn't random, it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, an act meant to mark her dominance, her anger, and her imagined victory. Even more disturbing was what investigators later discovered. Christa had taken a small piece of Colleen's skull as a trophy. She carried it around with her afterward, bragging about what she had done. Witnesses at Job Corps reported that she showed it to people like it was proof of her power, her fearlessness, her cruelty. This wasn't just murder, it was ritualistic, personal, a calculated expression of obsession gone mad. Detectives quickly traced the crime back to Christa, to Daryl Shipp, and Shadala Peterson. Their stories were inconsistent, their emotions cold, and the evidence overwhelming. It didn't take long for the truth to unravel. Christa didn't deny what she had done. In fact, she talked about the killing with a disturbingly casual tone, almost proud, almost entertained. What the investigators realized was chilling. Christa Pike never expected to get caught, but even if she did, she didn't seem to care. This chapter in the case revealed not just the brutality of the crime, but the mindset of a young woman whose darkness had consumed every last trace of humanity. In the days that followed, investigators peeled back the layers of Christa Pike's world, one disturbing detail at a time. What they discovered wasn't just evidence, it was a blueprint of obsession, jealousy, and the chilling certainty that the murder of Colleen Slemmer had never been a spontaneous explosion of rage. It had been built slowly, brick by brick. Detectives recovered journals, pages inked with hostility, and handwritten fantasies of violence, sketches of knives, and cryptic messages to her boyfriend, Daryl Shipp. Each entry felt like a window into a spiraling mind, but also a roadmap of intent. They found notes written in a script both childish and venomous, describing how Colleen deserved it, how she had it coming. These were the moments, as the prosecution later argued, where Christa revealed herself not as lost, but as deliberate. Q. Wakas. Insert original court exhibits here, handwriting samples, diary scans, and police evidence photos, just like Woman of Crime. Witness statements added weight to the narrative. Classmates spoke about how Christa had talked for days about hurting Colleen, warning that something big was coming. She wasn't confused, she wasn't hunted by unseen voices. She was planning. Still, perhaps the most damning detail was the charm she wore around her neck. A tiny piece of bone carved from Colleen's skull. A trophy. A grim reminder that Christa wanted the world to know exactly what she had done. When Christa Pike finally walked back into the courtroom for the next phase of the trial, something in the room shifted. It wasn't silence, it was suspension. The kind where even the judge's breath seemed held in place, waiting to see which version of Christa would appear that morning. The smirking girl from earlier hearings? Or the suddenly subdued defendant who'd realized the world was no longer bending around her? This time, there was no smile, no flicker of defiance. She kept her eyes down, hands locked together so tightly, her knuckles flushed white. Prosecutors presented the final threads of their case, photos, timelines, witness summaries. Every piece pointed to the same conclusion. This was not madness without direction. This was cruelty wrapped in calculation. Q. Wakas. Insert original courtroom footage here. Christa seated, the prosecution speaking, the judge observing. Just like Woman of Crime. By the time the state rested, the courtroom didn't just breathe again. It exhaled with certainty. When the jury returned, there were no murmurs, no shifting seats, just the heavy collective stillness of a room bracing for impact. Christa Pike looked up only once, a brief flicker of fear crossing her expression, before disappearing behind that same blank mask she'd worn for most of the trial. The foreman rose, holding the papers that would define the rest of her life. Guilty. On every count. The words landed like iron on the courtroom floor. Not a gasp. Not a whisper. Just the weight of justice settling into place. Even Christa didn't move, didn't cry, didn't plead. She stared forward, as though the meaning hadn't fully reached her yet. Cue Wakas. Insert original verdict footage here. The moment the foreman reads the decision, the judge nods. The courtroom absorbs the impact. The path that had begun with threats and jealousy had ended in a sentence that left no room for escape. When Christa Pike was finally escorted out of the courtroom, shackles echoing against the tile floor, it felt less like the end of a trial and more like the closing of a long, brutal chapter in Tennessee's darkest history. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She simply walked, shoulders lowered, eyes forward, into a future carved from concrete and steel. Her sentence was death. And until that sentence is carried out, she will live in the quiet isolation of death row, where time crawls and every day mirrors the one before it. Cue Wakas. Insert original prison intake footage or archival images here, just like Woman of Crime. The case of Christa Pike would continue to raise questions about youth, jealousy, violence, and how a single choice can dismantle countless lives. But for the families broken by her actions, the final chapter had already been written.